There is kind of almost a rejection of the Africanness of, I would like to say, so-called colored people, because, as you said, that term was imposed upon a cohort of people that included, as you said, people from many tributaries, or as the Camissa Museum says, 7 tributaries. Why do you think there is this rejection of the African part of what constitutes colored personhood?
Sure. Let me firstly just go back to say that I don't want to be sort of, because these conversations are nuanced, right? So it's difficult to get your point across without offending someone in the process. So when I say imposed, yeah, true, it was imposed on us by legislation. But of course, there are people who've embraced the term and the label colored. And I think it's important to recognize that people are free to identify how they wish to identify. And so, as I've said, even, and in fact, it's late 1800s, early 1800s, there were, communities who called themselves colored, and it was a term by which they were known, and sort of apartheid sort of co-opted that. But anyway, that's another conversation. I think the rejection of the African identity is a strange concept for me, because it's there's white people who've come here who can only trace their first ancestors to Africa about 300 years ago, who call themselves Afrikaner. They're not ashamed to be Afrikaner, which is African. It's just Afrikaans or African. And yet there are many colored people who shy away from the idea that they're African. You will find them rather mentioning the European ancestors. My grandfather was Dutch, or my grandmother was Irish, or something like that, but very seldom go into the African ancestry, which is, I think, it's a pity. But I do think it's a sign of the success of apartheid, because they were part of the process of the sort of, or rather the project of apartheid was to de-Africanize, or rather divide people. And one of the ways to divide people was to tell colored people they're not African, so as to get them away from this group of people who were considered black or African by the apartheid government. And in a sense to co-opt them and Indian people, which is why the tricameral parliament came about as a result, to sort of create a buffer between white people and black people. And I use that term very sort of, generally, because I think in some ways colored people can also claim that the black identity, which is of course happened during the black consciousness movement of Steve Biko and others, who said we are all, we're all black. If we're not white, we're all black. So I think this attempt to distance themselves from the African identity was really a sign of the success of the apartheid government, to de-Africanize colored people, to make them feel that they were not African, that they were somehow a little bit better than African. Just slightly worse than white, but slightly better than African, somewhere caught in the middle. So when you use this term, I forget the term that we use for this, the in-betweeners.
The in-betweeners.
I think that is really what the project was about, and it succeeded in many respects.
Now, before colonization, obviously before Jan van Riebeeck and Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape, what was the lay of the land in terms of as the Camissa Museum terms, the 7 tributaries of, I would say, colored people? Yeah.
Listen, I think when we talk about it, the first thing, because there's also that concept which one has to deal with, because there's this idea that when Van Riebeeck came, he found this bunch of raggedy men walking on the beach, and he used the term strandlopers, which is still sort of in our lexicon as a description of those Khoi people that he found found when he landed. The truth is, of course, that many years before Van Riebeeck came, there was a large, or rather huge, trade between Europe and the East. Which followed after the period of Bartholomew Dias and others who came around the Cape. And there's like more than 100,000 people at some point or the other touched shore from Europe on what is today the Cape. And in fact, Atsamaya, who was called Harry Strandloper by Van Riebeeck, in many ways represented people in those sort of trades. So there was an active citizenry at the Cape at that point. People who lived here, who traded with people from the East and from Europe, who had established communities. So it was a vibrant, one could say protoport of sorts, where people came to refresh. Van Riebeeck was the first one to come in from Europe to come and establish, a permanent settlement. The others just came, did their thing stayed for a few months and moved on again. He decided to settle based on the instruction of the Dutch East India Company. So the trade was all around the coast. It wasn't just at the Cape. Obviously, on the east as well, we find evidence of that sort of trade as well. On what is now KwaZulu and so forth. So this idea that the Cape, or what was now South Africa, was this empty land where nothing was happening until the Dutch came in 1652 is a myth, right? Which is one of the myths that's important for certain people to perpetuate.
Of course, this myth is that they brought all the land on the 3 ships that they, So, but what actually happened in reality?
Yeah. At the conclusion of one of the first wars of resistance between the Khoi and the Dutch, in fact, and of course, we can thank Van Riebeeck in some respects because he kept a very meticulous record in his diary. So the diaries is available for people to go, it's look in the archives and so on. But he had a confrontation with Atsamao, who said to him, if I were to do the same that you did to me now, if I were to go to Holland and just take over land and say this is mine, would it be acceptable? Mm. He said, well, but Van Riebeeck said to him, well, but we won this land through conquest. I mean, we beat you in a war. So that's why it's ours now. And your land, and he pointed across the Cape Flats to those mountains, it's now known as Hottentot Holland. He said, that is your Holland. You can go there, but this is now our land. Hence
the nomenclature of Hottentot Holland.
Yeah. So no, they didn't come with land. They didn't come. In fact, those wars between the Dutch and the Khoi was exactly because Atsamao decided to reclaim some of the cattle that was stolen by the Dutch. So they didn't come with cattle. They didn't come with land. That is, it is part of this sort of mythology which has developed over time. So when people, and that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, is about this idea that colored people who are ancestors were apolitical and didn't put up a fight. No, there were many wars of resistance. Asamao's resistance started then already in the 1660s. 1658 was the first sort of Dutch the war of resistance. But there was a lot of resistance to this idea. It wasn't just the Dutch coming here being welcomed and everyone getting along happily. There was a lot of conflict leading to the total, subjugation of people who are now called, colored people. Yeah.